The battle lines are being drawn over an Indigenous voice to Parliament. The Nationals say they're opposed to it, but they're not united, and there are differing views within the Indigenous community. In a year where the Queen's death was the biggest story, what is the future for First Nations people? Welcome to the final Q&A of the year. Thank you for that welcome. I'm Stan Grant, here to give you some answers tonight. Best-selling author Grace Tame, Independent MP for Wentworth, Allegra Spender, New South Wales Treasurer Matt Kean, Republican, Olympian and former Labor Senator Nova Peris, and ABC broadcaster Josh Szeps. Please make them all feel welcome. If you're like me, a few of you may be tired from that stunning Socceroos win, but keep watching. We're going to get to that a little bit later. And we've got a really special performance as well from poet and performer Stephen Oliver. That's coming up later in the program. Remember, you can live stream us around the country on iView and all the socials. Quanda is the hashtag, so please get involved. We'll get started tonight with Steve Coe.
Thank you, Stan. I just want to ask the most obvious question. Respectfully, why is it that there must be a constitutional voice for the 812,000 Australians who identify themselves as Indigenous when they're already represented by Linda Burney, she herself being of Aboriginal background? Actually, why should a particular ancestry have the monopoly on voice to Parliament? Why can't we have the a voice for the almost 1.4 million Chinese Australians as well? Really, surely any voice to Parliament must have its foundation on fairness to all Australians. You would agree on that?
Nova.
First cab off the rank, eh? Yeah. Do you know, you've obviously come here, you've acknowledged that you're Chinese, but you've come here with your identity. You've come here with your language. You've come here for freedom. And we as First Nations people, Aboriginal peoples, everything about us has been denied. So much so that in 1992, the High Court decision with the terra nullius notion. So everyone came here with the notion that this was no man's land. So you're not the only one that's asked that question, but for us as First Nations peoples, we've been locked out for so long. The wars of discrimination has kept us out. And, myself as a former Olympian, or I shouldn't say a former, once an Olympian, always an Olympian, for me to go to other countries around the world wearing a green and gold tracksuit and people asking me what country I come from, and I say, I'm an Aboriginal woman, and people say, oh, do Aboriginal, black people exist in your country? So for us, it's timely. We've been crying out to be heard for so long, and you're not the most impoverished person on this country. Us, we're the most incarcerated, the sickest. The other home care statistics, I was floored by the Closing the Gap report when it had 22,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children a year being taken off their parents, and only 16 returned. There's a big problem in this country. And, we are an industry. People make profit of us being sick and incarcerated and not being part of equality in this country. So it's timely. And if you can't see us as the First Nations people, and everyone's come to this country for freedom, everyone has benefited from the injustices that have occurred to First Nations people in this country.
Right, but isn't part of the argument, one thing that whenever we have conversations about this on my radio show, part of the argument of people who oppose the voice is that all of the things that you're talking about, the higher rates of incarceration, the higher rates of infant mortality, the inferior rates of healthcare, that those things are where we should actually be focusing on, and that, quasi-symbolic things like a voice to Parliament or recognition in the Constitution don't necessarily affect those things, so that maybe there are more practical things that can be done than a voice.
Well, it's interesting because Ken Wyatt said that he wanted something legislated. And I sort of feel that, you know, when I was in Parliament, when I gave my last speech in 2016 on closing the gap, I recited words from Neville Bonner's 1971 opening speech.
The first Aboriginal person.
As the first Aboriginal person, the year that I was born. And so a lot of things haven't changed. And if we don't really prioritise things, and, you know, people are saying, well, why do we have to have an Aboriginal? Because, you know, I guess for us, why are we still talking about it? Because it's a big problem and it is a national shame, you know, how we are treated, and with the incarceration rates and again, you know, the discrimination in so many systems, the systems of governance, and it's not going to go away.
But if you got rid of all of those disparities, then would the justification for a voice cease to be compelling? Surely not.
Well, for me, like, I'm really scared about going to a referendum. Because referendums, you know, we've had 8 successful in 47, however many referendums. And we saw what happened when we went to the public around marriage equality. You know, why can't people love each other for whatever sex they are? But for us, we want to be recognised, but in a way, and a lot of mob are calling out for treaties. You know, you speak to the Yolngu mob, they've asserted their sovereignty. A lot of mob have for a long time, and we want to make sure that a voice doesn't cede the sovereignty and doesn't take away the treaty.
Just on that, I want to come to the other panellists in just a moment, but just on that, we'll go to a video from Pengate Bray.
My name, Pengate Bray, Mabatwa Arunta man. I am 72 years of age, a traditional owner of Alice Springs. In all my years, I have not seen any government, no matter who they are in power, do anything for us territory blackfellas. So what my question is, what is the power of the voice? It's going to be another kick in the guts for us poor people. Thank you.
Matt.
Yeah.
Well, I respectfully disagree. I don't think the voice is going to divide our country. I think it's an opportunity to unite our country. I don't think it's going to undermine our democracy. I think it's going to strengthen it.
It's certainly not what the Nationals said this week. And well, your federal coalition partners, your state coalition partners, is this... You think they're wrong in coming out and opposing it in the way they did this week? Well,
I disagree with their position, very much so. And I recognise that there are good people in the National Party, like Michael McCormack and Andrew Gee, that have different views to their colleagues. And that's great. And it just shows that there's diversity within our political system, the diversity of views within our political system on these issues, within our political parties, as there are across the community. But as Nova rightly said, it's an opportunity for us to recognise the atrocities and injustices that have occurred in the past, and an opportunity to recognise the entrenched discrimination and inequality that manifests itself still today, and an opportunity for us to move forward together to a positive future. That's the opportunity the voice gives it, and we should grab it with both hands.
Yeah. Look, I think too. So I think I appreciate you asking the question, because this is the dialogue we as a country need to have in a really respectful way. And I'll tell you why. The 2 reasons I support the voice. The first is that when you are making laws for people, if you don't listen to them and you don't understand what they actually want, then you will fail them. And I think this is the point, when you raise the question, shouldn't we get services, shouldn't we focus on that? The point is, we've been making services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders for years and decades without actually really understanding what they as community want. And all the evidence shows that if you really empower the community to say, this is what we need, then you get better outcomes. And this is about having better outcomes. And thank you. But the second reason is, when in 1901, when our Constitution came into being, there were no Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices, even though these were the people who'd been living in this country for 60,000 years. And I think as a country, as we think about how we move forward, we must recognise the enormous contribution of the people and move forward as one country that recognises that special bond. So that, for me, that's about us as a wonderful Australian nation going forward, which recognises, so many different parts of a wonderful nation, but we must recognise that.
Grace, Nova said before she's worried, though, about a referendum, and she referenced the marriage equality plebiscite, which ultimately was carried. But these things can be very hurtful and very divisive campaigns. Do you share those concerns that Nova has?
Oh, look, it's all very difficult. You know, the devil is in the detail, and attention to detail in this day and age is a dying art. And so I sit here listening very carefully and respectfully as somebody who knows this isn't my issue to speak on. It's my issue to listen to and to sit with the experts, and the experts in this case are the Indigenous community members. And as you say, there is division, there's discord within that community, which makes it difficult. And it seems, though, overwhelmingly, that people in the Indigenous community do want the voice, and for reasons that Nova was saying, and that you echo as well, is that when we're making laws and we're trying to drive positive change, we need to defer to those people. And that's what's important. I mean, and the question that you asked, though, was about you know, the difficulty that can arise. And
we know how divisive these things can be, don't we?
Yes, what's really difficult is that there's labels, you know, and we're talking about all these different things, whether it's LGBTQI or you know, First Nations, or you know, in my case, you know, people always refer to me as a child sexual abuse survivor or whatever it is. The thing is, there's a difference between using something to label somebody, you know, for purposes of education and identity, or to put someone in a box. You know, a definition is not the same thing as division. It's helpful in forming understanding, but a definition is not an end point. It's a building block, and that's really important to create that distinction. And I, you know, I'm speaking in platitudes here, but I guess it's the truth, really.
Just on the question of the divisiveness of the referendum, can I just pipe up and put in a defence of democracy and a defence of the rambunctious divisiveness that it entails, in the sense that, I mean, I think what you were saying, Allegra, is totally right. That, I mean, I wasn't putting forward a particular opinion of mine. I was just saying that we live in a society that thankfully has a huge diversity of opinion, not just, you know, across every metric. I mean, even within the Indigenous community itself, you have a difference of opinion. I'm a bloke who's married to another bloke. We went through that referendum. It was a little bit dirty. It was a little bit feisty. Guess what? That's the nature of living in a civil society where there are disagreements. There are going to be disagreements. There are going to be people, you know, there's going to be a bit of sledging, and there's going to be a bit of this and that. We also
know, Josh, it's how you disagree. When you're dealing with communities that are very traumatised, then that becomes very much more sensitive.
Of course, but I mean, to move forward, you're going to have to cop a bit, aren't you?
We've been copping a lot of it for a long, long time, though. Let's make it
No, I do need to move on, but I want to finish with you on this, because Pengate raised something that I think you were also alluding to, and that is that in our communities, First Nations communities, there is also differences of opinion on this. You were just in Canberra, you were taking the temperature, having meetings with people, you're out in communities as well. Where does this land with First Nations people? Well,
I guess, I was in Canberra yesterday on the floor of Parliament when I heard the Prime Minister deliver his speech, and the opposition leader as well. And, you know, I took a Tiwi lady in because she felt that her voice wasn't being heard. And Uncle there from Central Australia feels like consecutive governments, and I know that because, like I said, my last speech, and our lives have been used as political footballs every time a cycle of government comes around. At the end of the day, I feel that there is some sort of merit in this, and if we don't start doing something differently, nothing will change. And this voice, who is going to be in the voice? Because I know myself that we as Aboriginal people, I know a lot of mob listening would agree with me, that we have our mission managers, we have our gatekeepers, and there are people in government who do not want us, like I said, to be able to enjoy the freedom that everyone else, because we are a commodity. You know, our misery is a commodity for a lot of people. And you know, we just want to be equal, we want to be free, and you need to understand our starting point. You know, we've endured a lot of trauma in this country for a lot of years, and it's 2022, 2023 next year, and we've got to start doing things differently.
It is interesting though, sorry. It's interesting though, so before the show, I just happened to be talking to Dr. Tracy Westerman, who's an Indigenous psychologist. And one of the things that we come across with in the sector that I work in, which is fighting pedophiles, which is great fun. That's a joke. And not literally, obviously. That would make for quite a spectacle. Is that data can be manipulated just as easily as minds can. And, you know, we were talking before about, you know, and we heard from the Indigenous man before in that video, you know, about the, you know, the poorer communities and the representation in these poorer areas. And, you know, a lot of the data from those areas is not necessarily the truth. And so, you know, are we hearing the truth of the stories and the representation from the poorer people and from the poorer communities and what they really have to say about this issue? So before we actually move on, I do actually wonder, is that something?
Which was the point you were making.
Yeah, about the people in the community.
Yeah.
You know, it's tiring being so impoverished, and it's so tiring picking up the newspaper and seeing all these deficit statistics about our lives, you know, and it's really draining on our young kids who keep picking up the newspaper and reading that. So, you know, if we can do something different and the model's right, it's something that all Australians should embrace, because you can't move forward as a nation without understanding the history of this country.
OK, it's time to move on. Let's hear now... Thank you. We'll hear now from Rebecca Liu.
It's obvious Scott Morrison undermined the spirit of the Australian democratic system, although what he did was not illegal. It seems that he used the usual script out of goodwill and denial to deflect this most horrible autocratic action in Australian history. Can politicians bear no consequences if no legal outcomes are found? How can Australians swallow this while the Liberal Party is still standing by him? Can't they see we deserve some justice?
Well, we have two politicians. One of them's a Liberal. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Rebecca. And can I just say it's no secret that I've disagreed with Scott Morrison on a great many issues. And he has disagreed with me more often than not. And I strongly disagree with him on what he did with regard to assuming powers without telling the electors. Transparency and integrity is at the heart of our democracy. For people to have confidence in our system of government, our politicians and our political class need to be transparent with what we're doing, and that's not what happened with Scott Morrison.
It's also not what happens often in politicians in many different guises, is it? I mean, you've lost premiers in New South Wales and your own party as well through ICAC investigations. Does that also go to that sense of a loss of faith and trust in politicians?
Absolutely, and we need a strong anti-corruption watchdog to ensure the public can have confidence in our democratic institutions. And if just closing my remarks, I'd say the best way to deal with these issues is letting the public decide. The public decided to throw out the previous government, and I would say that the best way to judge Scott Morrison is at the ballot box.
Which you're about to face next year, but we'll just hold that for one moment, Allegra.
Yeah. Look, I sat on the floor yesterday and I thought it was incredibly sad. I mean, it's nothing worse to be censuring a Prime Minister for that sort of behaviour, and I 100% agree with you that this was, this was it was destroying trust in our democracy, and that is such a precious thing. And, one of the jobs, I think, of myself is in Parliament is to say, how do we actually invest in our democracy? How do we bring in things like the anti-corruption watchdog, which we have just passed, I think, yesterday in the House, but also how else can we make sure and reinvest in the trust of the people? How can we reform donation laws so that it's more transparent? How can we make sure we don't have the jobs for the boys? Because these things, time on time, they erode the trust, and that it's too precious to do that too.
Rebecca, there's a lot of anger in your voice when you ask that question. You've just heard from two politicians answering it. Does that make you feel better, or have you heard this before?
Well, I think they made a very fair sort of comments on that. Of course, for me, on a regional level, we do need ICAC. We do need some legal mechanisms in future to prevent this to happen again. But Scott Morrison just bear no consequences.
I censured him with my face.
That's why my question also involving how can we swallow it? I can't. I can't swallow it.
I'll go to you, Grace, on this because it's often. That's it. We've lost the show here. No, but Grace, there is that question. You hear it a lot. And who does pay the price here? What are the consequences? What do you think people would like to see?
Look, it's the everyday people, and I firmly believe that in life nothing maps neatly into pure good and pure bad. It's not about being on a particular side of politics, whether you're a Liberal voter or a Labor voter or an independent or whatever it is, Nationals, Greens, it doesn't matter. You're going to have good faith and bad faith actors on any side in life, and the thing is, in especially in the last 2 years, but before that, I've had quite an interesting life personally, and I've met all kinds of different people, whether they're ex-cons, whether they're, politicians, policemen, prime ministers on both sides. And it doesn't matter who you are. I personally think people are on a plane and not like this. It's not about being on a hierarchy, if you will. And there are lots of differences, whether they're financial differences, emotional differences, mental differences, whatever have you. If you are abusive of power, that is a really distinct thing. And I was trying to point this out without my facial expressions prior to the 25th of January, for the sake of the people. I work in a sector where especially narrative and knowledge are the key instruments of power because they are very easy to distort and massage. Pedophiles are very cunning. Now, I'm not obviously comparing who we're talking about to that type of people. They are way down the end, okay? You can't even see them from here on that end of the spectrum. But it's very important that we have people in positions of power that we can trust. And the gaslighting, the dishonesty was another level that we witnessed, and again, it doesn't matter whose side or what side of the ledger. It's about what we were getting as Australians, and especially as a representative of the survivor community. And I know I can't speak for all survivors of child sexual abuse. I'm just one of many. 1 in 6 boys it is, and 1 in 4 girls. And survivors can look like anyone. They can be a First Nations person, an LGBTQI member, whoever you are, doesn't matter. It affects us all as just as broadly as the human race. But there was nothing. There was nothing. It was a disgrace. And so, yeah, we need better. than that.
You're right.
Rebecca, I just want to reassure you that every time we do a segment about this on my radio show on ABC Radio Sydney, there is someone who has your level of passion and your level of outrage about this. And honestly, it was actually a bloke who called in and he said, you know what, I get when ScoMo did it the first couple of times.
Yeah.
Right? I get it was the pandemic, we were all a bit crazy. You know,
Yeah.
I think we can all forgive each other whatever we did in March to May of 2020, right? Because we all didn't know what was going on. And so that's when he gave himself these additional portfolios of Health Minister and Finance Minister. But then a year later, he comes back to that well.
Was it the secrecy, Josh, do you think?
Yeah.
Was it the secrecy that angered people?
It was the secrecy, it was the duplicity, and it was the lack of consequence. And I think the only reassurance that anyone can take is that there are political consequences, and his party is now a rump of its former self. So you hope that his colleagues in the future will be a bit more discerning.
But the thing is, he wasn't even a good villain. He had the ambitions of Voldemort with the brains of Peter Griffin.
On that note, we'll move to our next question. There's a lot to get through. Daniel Lukovitz. Daniel?
My question is to Matt Kean. You've said that the Liberal Party needs to get on board with the program and pre-select more women. So, on that basis, are you prepared to stand aside in your seat and allow a woman to run at the next election?
Well, what I've said is the Liberal
I think the answer is no. When it starts with will, I think it's no.
What I've said is the Liberal Party, for it to be electorally successful, needs to be representative of the diversity across the community. And clearly, the Liberal Party does not have enough female candidates putting their hand up to represent us running for Parliament. And as the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, that's something that I want to change.
That's not the question that was asked, though. The question was, would you actually step aside for a woman in your seat?
Well, what I'm saying is that this is not about... no, hold on. This is not about men stepping aside. This is a...
Stepping aside, because you are the person who set this standard, and it's the standard that you either live by or walk past.
No, we're not saying that all men should step aside, but we are saying that all people should be able to have the opportunity to put their hand up to run and represent their communities. And I welcome competition in my seat or any other seat. We should all be welcoming competition. That strengthens our democracy. And right now, we're only seeing male candidates being put forward by the Liberal Party. And I'm saying for us to be more appealing across the electorate, we should be putting forward candidates that represent the diversity of our communities.
Daniel, I understand you did actually run as an independent in the last federal election against Allegra, or in her seat. You wanted her seat.
Yes.
But Allegra won. Over to you.
I'm going to say the point is actually of diversity is not to win the election. The point of diversity is to get better outcomes for the country.
Yeah.
But Allegra, what's interesting here, though, is that the Teals showed that you can go outside the two major parties. I mean, in other circumstances, it's fair to say you could well have been a Liberal candidate. You've been called a Liberal blue blood, and we know it runs in your family. But you didn't.
Yeah.
So what does that say about the Liberal Party and its failure to actually find positions for people like yourself?
Look, I think... I fundamentally think the Liberal Party needs to rethink its in relationship to women, and I agree with you fundamentally, Matt, that you're not going to win on the election. But the truth is, you're actually going to, until the more that the Parliament reflects the people, and it's not just about gender, it's actually about the diversity, ethnicity, LGBTQI status. It's actually just about reflecting the country. Like, if we can reflect the country in our Parliament, we will have better decisions. And I think that's the big missing point, I think, in both at the federal level and at the state level. And honestly, I think it's a major contributor for why, they're lost at the federal level, because women want to be represented and we're sick of waiting. We want to be in the room when people are making decisions about us.
I was just going to, off the back of that, federally Labor have got 50% women represented in the federal Labor Party, but I'm also told that the Northern Territory Labor Party, out of the 9 ministers, 7 are women, which is actually a world record accordingly to any sort of cabinet in the whole. So it just goes to show we've got a female, chief minister, and they're doing really well.
Let's bring in Fiona Liu now. Fiona?
Oh, hi. So I have a question for Matt Kean.
You're not, Matt.
Sorry, Matt. So over the last 6 years, we've had many premiers, Casino Mike, ICAC Gladys, and now family man Dom Perrottet. If the Liberals win the state election this coming March and something happens to the incumbent, is Matt Kean ready for the top job? Does he have his eyes on the prize?
My focus that the Liberal Party is putting forward a positive plan to build a stronger and more prosperous future for everyone, and that we're taking that plan to the election, and that we'll continue to fight for those.
You're going to have a lot of time next year to put that case. The question was,
Absolutely.
The question was, do you have your eyes on the top job?
No, this is not about jobs. This is about delivering outcomes for the community.
I have never understood why that question can't be answered. That honestly, it baffles me. Why can't politicians just answer that question honestly?
That is an answer in and of itself,
You just say, yes, of course I'd love to be president.
Tell us you want the job without telling us you want the job.
The answer is no. The answer is Dom Perrottet is the best person, in my opinion, to lead this state now and into the future.
It is interesting, though, Josh, because this does tie what we've been hearing here from, we heard from Rebecca earlier as well. It's this, can you believe what you hear from politicians?
Right. I think if the past 10 years has taught us anything in international politics, it's that people are sick and tired of phoniness and the kind of the BS that you have to listen to all the time. I hear it every single day from talkback callers. Like there's just a craving for some authenticity. I think that was part of the Teal wave. I think that was part of there is a real desire for something, and that is just one example. God bless you, but that is the biggest nonsense answer.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Grace. You've had your go. It's Allegra's turn. Here's a question from James Woodburn.
Oh, thank you for that. I'll give you a rest, Matt.
Thank you, James.
With the Teals effectively representing a protest vote against the major parties, and particularly the coalition, with limited comparative resources, what actual impact can or have you had?
Thank you for the question. Look, I'm really, really proud of what we've done actually in the first 6 months. And the heart of it is really actually representing the community. And, in my community, people care about climate, they care about integrity, exactly what you raised, about good government, they care about women, and they also care about business. And so what I've been trying to do in federal parliament is work on that and actually keep my how to vote that I did, I handed out at the polling booth, and I stick it, it's right behind me where I sit, and I look at it every week and go, where am I at on these things? And that's about, so I've been working with the government on climate change legislation, how to make it better. I've been working with the government on the integrity bill. I've been pushing them on things like migration and also on things like parental leave, the things that they didn't take to the election, but which I thought were really, really important things to do. So I work with, frankly, anyone at state, federal, local level to try and make those differences. But I'm really, really proud of what I think we have achieved. And, if you ask about what can independents achieve, you think about what Zali and Helen have done, as they have moved the conversation in this country around climate and integrity, which have been two of the biggest themes for the first 6 months. And they did that as, lonely members on the crossbench. So now we've got some power. It's pretty exciting.
I'm just wondering, Allegra, after the Victorian election, where Teals didn't do as well as perhaps they were expected or anticipated to do, what that actually says, whether this was a protest and the protest has been heard, and now people are looking elsewhere. What did you take away from Victoria?
Look, I think state and federal are different, and they were probably different governments that they were against. I think if you look at those independents, I think they got about 6 or 7 seats to marginal. So that's, you know, going from sort of very happy margins to marginal seats. And I think that's a reminder to every single politician who has a seat to say no one has a safe seat. And I think, frankly, that's good for any politician, because if you take your community for granted, then you are not acting in their community. So I think, you know, but I do think it's a different situation. That's how I see it, and I think for me the big focus is really, frankly, federal, because those are the issues that I was elected to do, and those are the issues that I will really fight to represent.
I'm just wondering, Nova, watching this as someone who's been in politics as well, one of the criticisms of the Teals were that they, first of all, very heavily backed by wealthy financial backers, white, and probably overwhelmingly conservative. What was your take? Were they reasonable criticisms?
Well,
I won't take it personally, don't we?
I mean, I guess people... The message I saw was that they were sort of perhaps sick of the major parties, and they wanted for something that was different and that could be more appealing. Diversity is good, you know, a different... Because it can be quite sterile in that place, and bringing someone in with a different angle can only be good for democracy in this country.
Is it in your future, do you think, Grace? Politics?
I had a shirt made, and I wish I had worn it, because it just says, no, I'm not going into politics. Because you ask me all the time, and I said no the first time.
Well, you see, you didn't give the political answer. See, if I'd asked Matt would have said, well, our platform is...
Okay,
So no.
You get more done. You know, you get more done. You get more done on the outside, lighting fires up the arses of these guys.
OK, well, we've got a fire under our program tonight. If you're just joining us, you're watching Q&A live with Grace Tame,
And the rest of us.
Matt Kean, Nova Peris and Josh Szeps. Now, some of you watching tonight may be a little bleary-eyed after that win by the Socceroos overnight, and some of you may be choosing not to watch at all. And there's been plenty of controversy about the World Cup. Let's go to Baka Hawari.
There has been a fierce campaign against Qatar hosting the World Cup. The country's religion and values dictate a certain stance on the consumption of alcohol, on LGBT matters, in fact, any public display of affection or sexuality. And they're happy that way. Why should the West shove so-called liberal values down others' throats? And what puts us in a better moral stance anyway? Our horrendous invasion of Iraq, or our treatment of refugees in detention centres? And on another note, we should advocate for the rights of migrant workers. But why this selective attention? Well, lots of our own clothing is made by oppressed, underpaid workers. If you are Qatari or Muslim, wouldn't you feel like this is a racist, targeted campaign filled with hypocrisy?
Josh.
Well, I might feel that way. I'd be mistaken if I did feel that way. I don't think that we need to... Look, there are a couple of things going on. There is a lot more that you can achieve by doing business with awful states than by excluding them from the community of nations. So I don't think that excluding Qatar from being able to host something like the World Cup actually achieves anything. We've been able to achieve successful reforms in Qatar by pressuring them on human rights and so on. They're certainly likely to be more open and less regressive than they would have been had the World Cup never happened in Qatar. But on the question of whether or not we have anything to be proud of in the West, whether or not we have a leg to stand on, I do fear that we're losing our sense of what made us as successful as we are. And I mean, this is a delicate thing to talk about, but I hear it all the time from listeners. I hear a fear that we're getting so kind of intellectually tied up in our own knots about how bad we are and our participation in the Iraq War and our participation in global capitalism and what an irredeemably white supremacist country we are, that we've lost our ability to speak clearly about problems in other countries.
I think the question, though, was... Yes, there was some moral relativism in the question, but the question also went to hypocrisy. Does he have a point about hypocrisy?
Yes, I think you're always going to be hypocritical. I think because we're all imperfect, there's always going to be an element of hypocrisy to any charge. But I don't think that you can compare a regime like Qatar's to Australia.
As a sports person, Nova, what went through your mind when you competed? Because, of course, you know, any country that hosts these big events are going to be open to scrutiny. Australia's hosting the Women's World Cup next year, and our people are the most impoverished and imprisoned people in the country, if not in the world. And yet Australia will be hosting that event. 2032, the Olympics will be in Brisbane. And again, First Nations questions or questions of treatment of refugees. What can sport bring to highlight these issues and bring about change?
Well, sports, to me, it's an equaliser to begin with. Like, in terms of if you're an athlete, like, there'd be so many, I'm sure, soccer players that are there who've come from impoverished backgrounds. And education and sport are our equalisers in life. I know myself, when I competed at the Sydney Olympics, there was a number of us Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander athletes that competed. I remember I was asked to boycott because of, you know, the circumstance of Aboriginal and people. And I remember Charlie Perkins saying, burn, Sydney, burn, you know, going into those
And I remember
Games.
you running with the torch, and I was there with you, and you ran barefoot to make the statement, didn't you?
I did, because people had said, you know, and it was 3 weeks before the Olympic trials, and I ran 1.9 kilometres barefoot, 0 degrees, and I didn't get a stone blister that whole time, and the Olympic flame went out bloody 3 times that day. So there were spirits looked after me, but the point was, people had said, is it an honour, you know, first of 10,000 people to carry the Olympic flame? Yes, it's an honour, but you know what? The people on one side of the rock, the people, the 5-star resort, they forget that on the other side of the rock, the Murugulu people live in fourth world conditions. You know, they're living off a diesel generator. So sport is also a platform where people come from those impoverished countries that we use it to elevate, give themselves a voice to address certain things. And what I think this can do is, like what you said, you know, let's hope that after the soccer, our human rights issue is going to get better. But you're right, Stan, in you know, what's going to happen with the 2032. I know the 2032 Olympics was one on an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander legacy that's going to be get left behind. That was a big part in Australia winning. So, like I said, it's important to have all our ducks and lines to ensure that, you know, there aren't going to be the protests that we can.
But it does provide a platform.
Absolutely, and it's not going to go away. Athletes will always use that platform.
And we've seen that. We've seen that in Qatar.
It goes back to 1956 Olympics as well.
That's right, with Tommy Smith and John Carlos. Let's go to Peter Mays now.
I am very old, and for various reasons, in 2018, I had to take out a mortgage, but it was a low rate. I'm working this year. I have no work next year. I'm having difficulty keeping up with my repayments. So my question is, what is the future going to be for people like my daughter and for other young people? And more importantly, how long will it be before I'm homeless?
Peter, before I come to the panel on this, how much you've watched interest rates go up. What does that mean in dollar terms for you? How much more are you having to find every month?
In dollar terms, it means that it's gone up from, I think it's I had a look this afternoon and I couldn't work it out, but I think it's gone up from about $350 a week to nearly 500.
So it's 150 a week that you have to find extra, and that is a very common story right now, Allegra. So we're coming into next year, inflation is going to be a problem. Interest rates keep going up. What does the next year look like?
Yeah. Look, firstly, you say that is really tough, and I am sorry to hear that is really, really difficult. And what you say about yourself, but also about your daughter, that's what every parent wants, is to say, I can leave my kids in a place that, you know, they've got, you know, they feel safe in terms of their options and their ability to have a good life. I think it is going to be a hard coming into the year. And I think that the things that you talk about is housing is super expensive in this country, not just because the interest rates are going up, because house prices are really, really expensive. And so I think it's probably the biggest issue outside climate that I think the government and, I am pushing very hard on this, needs to deal with. And this actually it's state, federal and local. We need to have more housing that is affordable in this country. That means building more housing, but also working in social and affordable housing. So I think that is going to be really important. I think the other thing is energy prices. Yeah. That's what I hear a lot of also about energy prices, not just for people, but also for businesses.
Are you also feeling the pinch when it comes to energy prices? Because they're going up as well.
Yep. Yeah.
That's another problem. Matt, just on that, because this has been in the news as well, the federal government's putting forward a plan for energy prices to be able to cap prices and hold in reserve for people to be able to make it more affordable for people. And the states are saying no to this, New South Wales and Queensland. Why?
Well, the states aren't saying no to this. What the states are saying is that this is a national problem that requires a national solution. You can't have each of the states and territories doing something different on energy.
Western Australia did that. Western Australia was able to cap and keep something aside to keep their prices down. Why can't you in New South Wales?
Western Australia is not part of the national energy market. They're on a separate grid. If you've got Victoria,
which was their choice.
Well, which is a function of the size of our nation. The East Coast states are all on the same electricity grid. So that's why the federal government proposal to cap gas prices is not going to do the job of dampening electricity prices in Queensland and New South Wales, because coal is setting the price at 50% of the time. And coal currently is going to, for export, the spot price of coal is at around $600 per tonne at the moment, up from about $100 a tonne. And that's feeding through to electricity prices. So again, this is not just a New South Wales problem, it's not just an Australian problem, it's a global problem caused by an illegal war in Ukraine.
But here, people are feeling the pinch, and we've got Peter here who's feeling the pinch, hands up here who's feeling the pinch right now when it comes to cost of living. Yeah, it's almost everybody. You have an opportunity to do something, don't you? You have an opportunity either to work with the federal government, or the federal government say, OK, you do something here that avoids the federal government having to pay tens of billions of dollars potentially in compensation. So will you get on board to do something?
Absolutely. We will absolutely. We are working with the federal government. I spoke to Minister Bowen yesterday about this. But the question is, who is best placed to solve the problem across the nation? Is it the states or is it the Commonwealth? This is a national problem. It requires a national solution, and we stand ready to work with the Commonwealth to protect people who can least afford the impact of rising electricity bills and rising inflation at the moment.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's not just people feeling the pinch from cost of living, but we've also had the floods and devastating people and no insurance. I want to bring someone in that we met a couple of weeks ago. Now, her home was flooded 3 times this year. Wendy Brooks is back with us. Thank you for being back, Wendy.
Thank you for having me.
When you were last here, you were really frustrated frustrated when it came to...
I still am.
Yeah, exactly. Has anything changed? Give us an update on where you're at with your insurance.
OK. I had a meeting on site with the insurance company. They were supposed to come to a resolution of the situation last Tuesday. What a surprise. They rang me and said they hadn't been able to do it and they've put it off again. Wow, this is what they've been doing for months, and it is extremely frustrating. And
so, what would you like to say, Matt Kean,
absolutely,
Treasurer?
you know, I mean, I'm sitting here listening to all of this, and what I can say to politicians is, you are dead right. The person on the street doesn't have much confidence in you anymore. We are sick and tired of hearing promises. Promises may or may not be kept. The Mayor of Eugowra called out Mr Albanese and Mr Peris when they came out there after the floods for their photo opportunity, because that's what it was. And he called them out, and rightly so, because he has already seen for himself that people in communities like Lismore, like Western Sydney, have been forgotten. And he's worried that they're going to be forgotten too. So I would like to know, one other thing that did happen too was the next morning after the show, I was actually rung by AFCA. Wow, what a coincidence. On the show, I said that I had had my case picked up by AFCA in August, but I was still waiting for someone to actually
It's good
run
they were watching, Wendy, so they called you.
It is. Now, AFCA, for those of you who don't know, if you have a problem with a government department, you go to an ombudsman.
Yeah.
If it's not a government department, your option is to go to AFCA, which is the Australian Financial Consumers Authority. To do that, you must have already first complained to the company in question, which I did. AFCA took up my claim, and the next day they rang me. He is now running with it, but quite frankly, I don't think AFCA have the resources anymore to hold insurance companies accountable.
So what would you like to see from Matt? He's the Treasurer of New South Wales. He holds the purse strings.
Absolutely.
What can he do for you?
Number one, listen to the people on the ground, okay? You're talking about winning elections. I disagree completely with what you said. To win an election, you have to listen to the people and what the people are saying and what the people want. I think it is incredibly disappointing that we're talking about the voice. We shouldn't have to have legislation and things to force politicians to listen to the people who elected them.
Okay,
You just saw someone light a fire up and up.
Yeah. Well, and now we're going to hold his ass to the fire.
And interesting you say that, because I've had people after the last show say, "Oh, Wendy, you should go in politics." No, thank you. There you go.
Matt, what can you do?
I want to become like them.
What can you do, Matt? Because we know that one of the problems here is insurance.
Yes.
What can you do to underwrite? Is there some support can be given to ensure that people get the insurance that they need and keep premiums down, because people can't afford to insure themselves because the premiums are so high? What can you do? You've got an election coming next year. Here's a chance to make a promise to someone who's directly affected. What is it? Well,
Wendy, I can't begin to imagine what you and your family have been through. And what I will say is yesterday I met with Suncorp and my office...
That's the insurer in question, by the way.
And my message to them was, stop putting your profits before people. Get on with looking after people, processing those claims and getting people back on their feet. That's why people pay their premiums. That's why they take out that product, and go and honour your contracts that you've entered into with people in good faith.
But who's going to hold them accountable to do that, right?
Well, absolutely.
But who is
the
going
government
to?
needs to hold them to account. The state government has a minor role in this, but the federal government is the people that look after the insurance industry, and we need to hold them to account.
Josh, you're hearing this. I mean, Wendy's here now, but you're getting these calls all the time, aren't you?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, Wendy, I'm so sorry. That's all. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And the reality is that there is no easy fix to this. You know, if Matt could flick a switch and make it all go away and make it all better, then he would. I'm convinced of that. And the reality is, you know, this is only going to become a bigger and bigger problem, because climate chaos is going to make things increasingly destabilised this century, and we're going to see more and more extreme weather events with greater frequency. And the ability of us as a community to come together and figure out what policy settings are appropriate, and also how much are we going to insure each other for these disasters. I mean, there will come a point at which, unfortunately, the population is going to go, how much are we willing to pay for all this?
That's the big... Wendy, we have to hold that because we're almost out of time, but thank you for coming back and for updating us. You've lit a fire. You're going to have a chance to vote next year, so you can hold Matt to account. To finish tonight, here's a question from Oriel Smith.
I'm sad to hear about the death of Christine McVie, as she's been inspirational to me in my own performing arts journey, especially the song Don't Stop, which has given me a lot of hope in overcoming challenges and trauma that I've endured in my life. My question is to Grace, do you ever feel like stopping? You're such a fierce advocate and inspiration, but I wonder, have you ever felt like stopping the work because of the media backlash and challenges that you faced? How can you continue to give young girls like me hope to keep advocating for change in this world, and what are your top 3 tips?
Well done.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. You know what? I'll be honest with you. Because that's all I can be. The honest answer is yes, I do, sometimes. I've had a really hard 24 hours, actually. You know, this morning I was meeting with the Department of Public Prosecutions because the child sex offender who abused me and others have alleged They've abused him as well. Oh, sorry. Well, that would be nice, wouldn't it? You know, he has been menacing and harassing me this year. And the thing is that he hasn't really stopped for the last 12 years behind the scenes, you know. And that's the background.
There's a court issue as well.
Yes, that's the background context, you know, in which I sort of wrote my book, and it's also the sort of background context of my life. And this work is not easy. This sector is very fraught. It's a very traumatised world that everyone operates in who fights against child sexual abuse. But it's also the most rewarding. And the most rewarding part of it for me is connections like this, the ones that I have in private with people who have also been through this. And like I said before, you know, it's 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls. And it's probably an underreported statistic because of the mechanism of shame that is driven by people like that man, who is a coward, by the way. Those people are cowards who do this, who try to drive wedges between men and women. That doesn't actually exist, okay? There isn't a wedge between us or any wedge anywhere. It affects all of us. It's as indiscriminate as life itself. And when I get to meet people who have also been through this, and I've travelled around the country, I've been very, very fortunate to get to do this work. And when I shared a story on the project about a man who came up to me in Perth who when I met him, all he could do at the time was just reach out a pinky finger, and I knew. He was in his 50s. He would have probably, you know, been, I don't know, 55 or something like that. And when we had a hug, afterwards I learnt that he hadn't had the courage to shake anyone's hand for about 10 years. And then I was in Townsville, and then somebody had heard that story. Then he reached out his pinky finger, you know, and now I go around the country and people will just reach out their pinky finger, and I have all these, you know, and it's this domino effect where people are finding the courage within themselves. And I had that happen with me, the first survivor who ever, you know, I ever met who was a fellow survivor. That happened. They were the person for me who did that, you know. And everybody can be somebody's someone as well. And it's a beautiful thing. So I do think about stopping sometimes, but I think about that effect more than anything. And it's this lattice work of change that we're forming, and we're standing up to these people. And so, yeah, I do. I get down and out sometimes, but I never give up, because I think about the people who we're doing this for, and it's the people who need a voice.
And that's, what do you take away from that? I mean, because you said the words of Christine McVie, sadly passed away from Fleetwood Mac, don't stop. Just listening to Grace now, what do you take away?
It just gives me hope that our future generations will be able to learn like amazing people like you and continue to advocate for what needs to be said.
That's lovely. Don't stop. Don't stop. Thank you, Grace. Thank you. If at any point tonight's discussion has raised any issues for you, you can contact 1800-RESPECT or Lifeline on the numbers that you can see there on your screen. And that's all we have time for. Thanks again to our panel, Grace Tame, Allegra Spender, Matt Kean, Nova Peris and Josh Szeps. Please thank them. And thanks to you here as well for your questions and for you at home. Not just for your questions, but those stories as well, which are so important to shaping our conversations. Now, this is our final Q&A for the year and our last on a Thursday. We're moving back to Monday nights next year. Watch the football on Thursday nights like the rest of you now. We'll be back on January 30 at 9:35. Now, we're going to close the show with something pretty special from poet, actor and performer Stephen Oliver. He's here with an ode to something we've talked a lot about tonight, understanding and respect. And what a fitting finish to this year this is. Here he is with an acknowledgement of Stephen.
I wish I had infinite wisdom, something meaningful I could impart. Like knowledge that's passed through an unbroken chain so long we don't know where it starts. Or maybe compassion that's not dealt in rations but comes from a heart overflowing. For compassion is wise. It sees without eyes. It grants us a depth to our knowing. Loss can be said in hundreds of ways, but is felt only in one. And the love that we feel for the ones in our heart doesn't feel like the love for our mums. Colour won't change how our skin feels the rain. And after it's all said and done, our stories are different, but they're also the same. We all need love from someone. And sure, that's cliche, we all can relate. We all have some story about a terrible first date, or maybe that potential that's now Facebook banned because they wouldn't try and listen or try to understand. Because you see, understanding means feeling it first. And we're not good at feeling, so we hit that reverse. We don't want to get close because we're told not to care. Looking out for yourself is what gets you somewhere. And then what the heck should we even be feeling? And does this feel right? Because it don't feel like healing. And so we stop short at the blame or the shame, not wanting to know how another feels pain. And we lose in that moment what may be the key, the act of acknowledging, of saying, I see. Because there in that moment, what has just been, someone for the first time felt they were seen. So now I acknowledge this country's deep pain. I acknowledge the stains left by many blood rains. I acknowledge the loss, the uncountable costs. I acknowledge the tears children shed for a cross. I acknowledge the rights still often denied. I acknowledge the chance that my elders have cried. I acknowledge that I can't acknowledge it all. So I acknowledge the tears that to this day fall. And now I acknowledge all those who believe that a goodness of spirit is there to retrieve. I'll acknowledge the caring, compassionate ways that helps with the healing towards better days. I acknowledge the listening that allows us to see the much needed connection that acknowledges we. For we must acknowledge that where we all stand is a place in which each of us all have a hand to either reach out, to touch and to heal, to teach and support, to help others feel, that sees us acknowledge the truth of this earth so we then may acknowledge the truth of its worth. And maybe we'll find that in doing so, that wealth isn't the thing that what we need grow, that what makes us richer is a deeper respect, a felt understanding of how we connect. Colour won't change how our skin feels the rain, or the warmth we all feel from one sun. Our stories are different, but they're also the same. Inevitably, our story is one.